This happened quite a while ago when I was 22. Enough time has gone by that I now feel comfortable sharing it. I had just graduated from college, had a great job, and very few expenses since I was living with my parents in my childhood home. Imagine saving up a good amount of money without stressing about rent or groceries, all while having full access to my childhood room, my car, and all the comforts of my hometown. I can confidently say I was living an ideal life. I truly appreciated how fortunate I was to have parents who let me stay at home without charging rent. I realize not everyone has that privilege, so I never took it lightly. Still, not everything was as easy as it might seem. What I'm about to share happened less than a month after I moved back in. I've never been the type of girl my peers would call a party girl. I don't drink heavily, I don't spend all my weekends at clubs, and I definitely don't let guys control any part of my life. That's just how I was brought up. My dad is the most important man in my life, and the whole hookup scene has always grossed me out. Because of that, my lifestyle is pretty predictable. I wake up, feed my caffeine habit, head to work, go to the gym, read a few pages of a book at home, scroll through my phone, and then go to sleep. On weekends, I like to go hiking, take quick road trips, play board games, or just do whatever sounds fun. But on one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our two other friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I had never been there before, but based on how Lindsay described it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, away from the crowds, with a private beach just steps from the ocean. To be blunt, Lindsay's family is very wealthy. I believe both of her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a strong feeling their beach house would be incredible, and I wasn't disappointed the moment I saw it. I was completely amazed. I'm not an architect or anything, but I know a modern home when I see one, and Lindsay's looked more like a military safe house than a regular house. I'd love to show you some photos. Trust me, I have tons. But out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think sharing those would be really inappropriate, even if none of what I'm about to say happened. The four of us brought our things inside and picked our sleeping spots. Even though Lindsay had enough rooms for each of us to have our own, we figured it would be more fun to stay together. So we all chose to sleep in one of the children's bedrooms, which had 2 bunk beds and its own bathroom. We were there for 3 nights, which I think is the perfect amount of time to stay with anyone who isn't family. I can get a little irritable, so people who are messy or rude tend to bother me quickly. Not that my friends are like that, but you get what I mean. I know I've already mentioned my tame lifestyle, but if there was ever a time to cut loose, it was that weekend. So I did plan to relax and drink a little more than usual. We wanted to keep the first night low-key though. So we headed down to the private beach and sat in the sand looking up at the stars. We were sipping White Claws and playing house music on Sabrina's speaker when we spotted something in the distance. A faint flickering light was glowing farther down the beach. We all went quiet and just stared as the light blinked on and off. It had a weirdly mesmerizing quality to it, even though it was also kind of unsettling. After a while, it became clear that the light was swaying side to side, like someone holding a flashlight. And not long after that, we realized that's exactly what it was. It looked like a small group, maybe 3 or 4 people, just casually strolling toward us. They weren't running, staggering, or moving oddly. They were just walking at a normal pace. As they got closer, we heard laughter, which helped ease the tension. Considering how late it was, they were probably just teens or maybe people our age. They must have seen us too, because eventually one of them shouted hi in a friendly tone. It was a male voice, and he sounded like he was around our age. Thea called back, and we exchanged some casual conversation as they approached. When they reached us, we saw it was three guys who looked just a little older than us. They had the classic beach guy look, which I could immediately tell my friends liked, especially Thea. She tends to be wild when it comes to men, so I wasn't shocked. She already knows how I feel about her choices, so I'm not saying anything new. To be fair, she's absolutely stunning, and I've never seen a guy not be drawn to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the seven of us kept drinking. It actually turned out to be a really good time. They weren't too flirty, but they weren't dull either. An hour and a few more drinks later, they invited us to come back to their place. Personally, I was tired and leaning toward heading to bed, but I could tell all three of my friends wanted to keep hanging out, especially Thea. I didn't want to be a buzzkill, so I told them to go ahead without me and turned in for the night. There were only 3 guys, and I wasn't planning on hooking up with anyone anyway. I made my way back to Lindsay's house while the rest of them walked along the beach, probably toward wherever the guys were staying. I cleaned up and went to bed. A little after 3 a.m., I was woken by a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was weird since she should have been home or with one of the guys by then. I answered, still half asleep, and what she said jolted me awake. She basically screamed that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to grab her car right away. Her words hit me like ice water. I've never felt fear and adrenaline like that before. I jumped into action immediately. My hands were trembling as I quickly got dressed and ran downstairs. I asked why she called me instead of the cops, and she said she already had. She kept me on the phone as she talked me through what to do. Following her directions, I got the driveway gate open, found her keys, and sped off in just a few minutes. She told me the car was about 10 houses down the beach, on the left side, so that's where I headed. She gave me a description of the vehicle and which direction it went, and I floored it trying to catch up. There wasn't a single other car out, and I was driving way too fast. I'm still shocked I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes, I spotted a car up ahead that matched what she described, moving slowly. I ended our call and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher exactly where I was. They told me to keep a safe distance and not alert the suspect, so I did. After what felt like forever, I finally saw flashing police lights. The car didn't speed off or anything. They probably figured the stop wasn't related to them. I pulled over and watched everything from a distance. It was total chaos. The police pulled all 3 men out of the car at gunpoint. They cuffed them and walked them over to the squad cars. Then one of the officers opened the SUV's trunk and found both Thea and Sabrina tied up and looking pretty bruised. As terrifying as the whole situation was, it was nothing compared to what they told us later. For the record, all 3 girls were fine with me writing this. We're still very close, so of course I asked first. But none of them wanted to write it themselves, and honestly, I don't blame them. Long story short, after I left, they kept drinking. Lindsay was the only one who stayed relatively sober, since it was her family's house. Eventually, the guys invited Thea and Sabrina to stay over, and the 4 of them split off. Lindsay told the last guy she was heading home. That guy got really upset, and at first Lindsay assumed it was just because he liked her. She told him she might have stayed but needed to keep an eye on the house. He got angry. They argued for a bit, and he told her to leave and never come back. She was fine with that, but on her way back, she realized she had left her purse, so she returned to get it. That's when she saw the guys forcing Thea and Sabrina into the SUV before speeding off. She called the cops, then me, and that was how it all unfolded. Thea's parents, both lawyers, pulled strings to do 2 major things: keep the incident out of the public eye and make sure the guys got the longest sentences possible. They succeeded. The house the men were staying in wasn't even theirs. it belonged to an elderly couple who were out of the country. That, along with the other charges, got them locked up for a long time. Still, I don't think any prison sentence could ever truly make up for what they did. As much as I hate saying it, the trauma stayed with me for years. I couldn't handle beaches, late nights, or even chatting with strangers, no matter how safe it seemed. I became closed off and started drifting away from my friends for a while, but thankfully, I've since moved past that. I can't begin to understand what Thea and Sabrina went through. A part of me believes that not remembering the event might actually be a blessing. What haunts me the most is that if I hadn't gone home that night, I might not have gotten to Lindsay's car in time. And if that hadn't happened, the police might never have found the men's vehicle. My name is Keegan. I live in Michigan with my parents. High school was a pretty good time for me since I got to meet lots of new people during those years. Naturally, I also had a few people I would hang out with outside of school. Most of the time, we spent time together at places like my local community center, where we would work out and play basketball. Back in freshman year, as the school year was nearing its end, I was looking forward to summer break. I was about to start driver's training and even planned to get a side job to start earning some money, though my start wasn't the quickest. I had this friend named Clayton. We usually hung out at least once every week. He was a grade below me, finishing his last year of junior high. To some extent, we were decent friends, and my dad and I even took him to a Detroit Pistons basketball game once. He was a huge basketball fan, so he was more than excited to see his first game. Despite all the good times in the past, it was when I started getting busier that I noticed he began to change a little. He would often get sad or upset when I wasn't free on a certain day. He was the type who could get pretty intense anger issues when he got angry enough. I remember one day clearly when I told him again that I couldn't hang out because I had to stay home and clean. It always seemed like he would pick the exact days when I wasn't available to hang out. I didn't check my phone until after I finished cleaning, and when I did, I saw that he had removed me on Snapchat. I sent him a message on Messenger asking why he got so mad and why he decided to unfriend me. He thought I was lying just to avoid hanging out with him. That thought stayed in my mind for a while, and honestly, I sometimes did lie because he was starting to act so annoying. Occasionally, I'd make up excuses like saying I was busy, going somewhere, or already had plans with someone else. He felt so left out that one evening after the sun went down, he showed up at the apartment I was living in at the time without telling me. I asked him why he didn't text me first. He said nothing. He just stared at me for a few seconds, then slowly walked away. Why was he even there so late? Why didn't he speak? Why did he give me that cold stare like I'd done something wrong? I didn't talk to him the next day either. That was also the time when I turned off my Snap Map on Snapchat to hide my location after he added me back again. A month or so passed, but he stayed the same, angry or upset when I couldn't see him. Then I got a text from my friend Nick, who I barely saw in person. Nick knew Clayton and also knew his ex-girlfriend. Nick told me some disturbing things about Clayton and what he had done. But my stomach sank when I learned from him and Clayton's ex that Clayton had held a knife to her throat and sexually assaulted her. Right then, I knew without a doubt that he was completely psycho. I removed him as a friend on every social platform right away without thinking twice. He sent me messages on Instagram before I blocked him there too. He spammed my phone with messages asking why I was removing him. I told him I just needed some space and would add him back when I was feeling better, but that was just a lie so I could escape him. That same night, while I was home alone because my parents had gone to the next town to have dinner with old friends, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. I cracked the door open a little to check the hallway, but it was empty. I assumed someone was just ding-dong ditching. I figured they'd leave and not come back. But when I randomly glanced out my bedroom window where the sidewalk light had burned out, I noticed a quick flash in the corner of my eye. I thought it might have been a light from a car, but then my stomach dropped as I saw a tall figure standing right outside my window. It was him. I opened the window and told him to leave and that I didn't want him here. He said he needed to come in and tell me something. I firmly refused and said I wanted him to go. But when he shifted around a bit, I noticed he was holding something in his hand. I couldn't clearly see what it was until he raised it up. And when I tell you I was terrified, I seriously thought I might faint because, no joke, Clayton was holding a knife. I told him I was calling the police, but by the time they arrived, he had already run off. I gave the best description I could of him to the officers. Since that awful night, I haven't heard anything about him or from him. Honestly, it wouldn't shock me if he had come with the intention to kill me while I was there alone. I truly believe he meant to hurt me. I assumed he probably ended up in juvie after that incident. Not only did that whole experience leave me horrified, but it also became one of the most traumatic things I've ever gone through. Having my parents gone during it all made it feel even more terrifying. I'm relieved I cut all contact with him when I did, because I believe if I hadn't, I might have ended up being his next punching bag, or worse, dead. I can't exactly remember what year this happened, but I've never been able to forget the fear I felt that night. It's one of those experiences you assume could never happen to you, or only happens in horror movies. Being that naive just makes it 100 times more terrifying if you ever do go through something like it. I was pretty young then, still in middle school, at that awkward age where you start to feel like you're becoming more grown up. You know, thinking you're more of a man or something, which seems funny looking back now. Anyway, it was summertime, so most of my days were spent either hanging out outside with friends or gaming indoors. That weekend was different, though. My parents were going on a short road trip to a city 8 hours away to relive their honeymoon, or something like that. I didn't really care much about the details, since all I could think about was how excited I was to have the house to myself. I was looking forward to inviting my friends over for a sleepover with no rules or anyone to tell us what to do. They left early Saturday morning, so by the time I woke up, they were already gone. I immediately texted my best friend Finn. The only problem was that his parents definitely wouldn't let him stay over if they knew there were no adults at home. But after some lying, Finn managed to get permission to come. He wasn't going to arrive until later that day, around 6 in the evening. Being excited, I opened up the front window so I could watch for him when he got here. But when I did, I quickly noticed a man standing outside. The only reason it caught my attention was because he was unusually close to the house, beyond the sidewalk, near the garage. He had a very distinct look. Longish dark hair, a patchy beard, and he was tall and skinny. It made me feel uneasy, so I moved away from the window, not wanting him to see me watching. A few minutes later, I peeked again, and he was gone. I didn't think it was anything worth worrying about. The rest of the day went by normally. I spent most of it in my room playing Xbox until Finn finally arrived at 6. We grabbed snacks from the kitchen, then headed upstairs, locked ourselves in my room, and played video games for about 5 hours straight. It was around 11:30 when Finn left the room to use the bathroom. But only 30 seconds later, he came back and asked if I heard something. I asked him what he meant, since I hadn't heard anything. Before he could answer, the entire house suddenly went dark. The TV, Xbox, lights, everything shut off. I couldn't even see Finn, who was standing just 5 feet away in the doorway. I felt around the floor with my hands until I found my phone and turned on its flashlight. Both of us stood silent for a moment, confused about why the power had suddenly gone out. I was also trying to listen for the sound Finn said he heard just before the blackout. After a while of hearing nothing and the power still not coming back, I asked him again what sound he'd heard. Finn said he wasn't exactly sure. Maybe it was a thump or a footstep from the floor below us. With the power outage, we figured it was probably connected somehow, but we still didn't know what caused it, and being younger and home alone, it felt a little unsettling. Realizing we needed to figure out what happened, we went into the hallway and headed down to the first floor. Once we left my room, we could hear the wind blowing outside. It didn't sound like anything unusual, but maybe strong enough to mess with the power. Maybe we were just looking for something to blame. Neither of us really knew what to do in a blackout. I knew there was an electrical box in the basement that could reset the power, but I wasn't sure how it worked. I felt nervous about touching anything down there. Finn thought he might be able to handle it, so I showed him where the basement was. Strangely, the basement door was already open. Hardly anyone ever went down there since it was unfinished, except for storage and old junk. But with my parents packing for their trip, I figured they might have gone down there recently for some luggage or something. The basement door was toward the back of the house, so I hadn't gone near it all day. That small detail made the situation even more unsettling. We still had our phone flashlights on. So Finn took the lead as we carefully stepped down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement wasn't very large, more like a wide corridor with concrete walls and boxes and loose items stacked along the sides. Naturally, it was pitch dark. Anything not caught in our flashlight beams was swallowed in blackness. We made our way to the electrical box. The metal panel covering it was already partly open. Finn checked it out, but seemed just as nervous as I was about touching anything. The main switch, a larger one, was flipped the opposite way from the others. Of course, we had no clue what that meant. After hesitating for a moment, Finn finally flipped the switch. Right away, we heard soft beeping noises and random startup sounds from the appliances on the floor above. The basement stayed completely dark, since we hadn't even bothered to try the lights before coming down. There was only a thin beam of light from the stairwell above. We started walking back down the corridor toward the stairs, but just before reaching them, we heard a sudden shuffling sound from the far side of the basement. Both of us froze, and I shined my light toward the noise. There was someone standing there in the darkness. I could clearly see their outline lit up by the flashlight and instantly recognized the tall, skinny figure with long, dark hair. He was half hidden behind some boxes, which cast a shadow over his face, so I couldn't tell if he saw us or if we were making eye contact. I panicked, turned around, and bolted up the stairs. Finn was right behind me. I slammed the door shut and we both ran straight out the front door. We were completely freaked out. We ran across the street while I quickly called 911. It was obvious now that the man in the basement had been the one who cut the power. While I was on the phone with the emergency operator, we both saw a shadow pass by one of the downstairs windows. Then about 15 seconds later, another shadow moved past an upstairs window. I think it was near my parents' room that he was walking through. But for the next few minutes, nothing else happened until the police arrived. They searched the house, but found nobody there. The man had already escaped through one of the back windows. Of course, my parents were called and asked a million questions, but in the end, nothing really came of it. There are so many disturbing things to think about when it comes to what happened that night, or what could have happened. Like how long that man had been watching our house, or how long he had been watching our family. What exactly did he plan to do after cutting the power and hiding in the basement? Thankfully, my parents were wise enough to move us out of that house not long after. Hopefully, we'll never run into that man again. Every couple of months, I visit my off-grid cabin deep in the wilderness of Montana. It's very secluded, which was exactly why I bought the place. It's perfect for short getaways to escape from everyone and simply enjoy my time alone in the forest. This was during the fall season. I had a 5-day weekend off from work and decided on a whim to drive 3 hours north to my cabin since I didn't really prepare for it. The drive left me a little exhausted because I hadn't gotten any extra sleep beforehand. I arrived at the cabin around 7 p.m. The long, isolated dirt road through the forest leading to the cabin was tricky to drive on after sunset, but when I reached the front, I parked and quickly unloaded my bag, tossing it inside before heading around back to start the generator. The entire cabin was powered by a gas generator, which ran the lights, outlets, and even the electric stovetop. I never used much electricity anyway, so the small generator was always enough for me. I filled it with gas, cranked it on, and went inside to light the wood stove and warm up. Up here in northern Montana, the fall gets pretty cold. I think at night, where my cabin was located, temperatures often drop below 25 degrees Fahrenheit during the fall. Winters were brutal, so I never bothered visiting the cabin then. I stayed awake for only about an hour before heading to bed. The next day, I spent time cleaning, mostly dusting things off and resealing some cracks in the cabin walls. Out of nowhere, in the middle of the day, I noticed an old truck slowly driving down the dirt trail toward the cabin. I could see it weaving between the trees, but when it got closer, the driver stopped. The truck sat there for maybe 5 minutes before turning around and leaving. I honestly didn't think much of it, assuming they must have taken a wrong turn and probably had their own cabin somewhere nearby. That night, around 10 p.m., I decided to enjoy the outdoors and started a small campfire on the front porch. This would also give the wood stove more time to fully heat the cabin before I went to bed. I grabbed some old fire starters I had left from months ago and stepped out onto the porch. There was a little fire pit out there, so I threw in a couple of logs and lit them. It was always nice during those first few nights at the cabin, just listening to the forest and the peaceful, quiet sounds of nature. But after sitting outside for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, the outdoor porch light suddenly turned off. I glanced back and saw that all the lights in the cabin had gone out as well. The only light came from the dim orange glow of the wood stove. That's when I realized the noisy generator wasn't running anymore. Annoyed, I got up and went around back. Sure enough, the generator was off. I cranked it several times trying to get it started again, but after about 10 good pulls, I gave up and kicked it in frustration. I figured it was just an old generator doing what old generators tend to do, breaking down and not working properly. But after I calmed down and checked the gas, it was completely empty. What the hell, I had just filled it with a whole canister the night I arrived. There was almost no chance it could have burned through all that so quickly. I checked the grass around the area for any sign of a leak or spill, but found nothing. I was completely confused. I honestly didn't understand how that was even possible. But since I didn't have any extra fuel, I knew I'd be without power until at least the next morning when I could drive into town to get more. Even with the inconvenience, I figured it wasn't really a big deal. I had the wood stove for heat and was going to bed soon anyway, so I didn't need lights or much else. I went back to the porch, sat down, and tried to relax again to enjoy the rest of the night. But it only took a few seconds before I noticed something out in the woods. A figure, or at least something that looked like a person, standing among the trees to the right of the dirt trail. I leaned forward to get a clearer view, but whatever it was stood so still and dark that I couldn't tell if it was actually a person or just a weirdly shaped bush or something else. After staring at it for a few minutes and seeing no movement at all, I gave up and went back to sitting quietly, listening to the calm night. But when I glanced toward the forest again a minute later, the figure was gone. I looked all around for several more minutes, trying to spot where it had gone, but I couldn't see it anywhere. Honestly, that put me a little on edge. I don't think of myself as someone who's easily paranoid, but that was probably one of the creepiest things I had felt in a long time. Obviously, if it were just a bush or some tree, it would still have been standing there. Thinking about that gave me chills. For the next 30 minutes, I kept my eyes fixed on the forest. The peaceful atmosphere surrounding the cabin now felt strange and unsettling. I had the feeling I wasn't alone anymore, like something or someone was watching me. The generator going out added to the unease, and something definitely felt wrong. Then, probably around midnight, I suddenly heard a noise to my left. It sounded like a stick falling from a tree, or maybe something stepping on it. I stared into the darkness in that direction, waiting to see if something moved. But after about 30 seconds, I turned back to face the front of the cabin. My heart nearly stopped. The figure was back, standing in the same place as before. Then I saw another one, and another. There were maybe a dozen shadowy figures standing among the trees about 100 yards away. All of them stood perfectly still and silent, hidden by the darkness, but definitely facing the cabin. My body reacted instantly, and I rushed back into the cabin. I stood behind the door for a minute, trying to gather my thoughts and debating whether or not to peek out the window. Eventually, I found the courage to look. All the figures were gone. The forest was empty again. That almost scared me more than when they were there. But I didn't have much time to think, because only moments later, I heard footsteps at the back of the cabin. I'm pretty sure I could make out 4 or 5 distinct steps, though there might have been more. I quickly shut the front window blinds. I stood there listening as these unknown people slowly moved around the cabin. They seemed to stay close together. It didn't sound like they were spreading out to surround the place. They came up to the front porch, and I held my breath as I heard the heavy thump of boots on the wooden boards right outside the door. I was sure that this was it for me. I didn't dare try to peek outside. The creepiest part was that whoever they were, they didn't speak a word. The only sounds they made were from their footsteps. Yet they all moved together like they knew exactly what they were doing. What kind of group would be doing this in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods? I stood frozen, waiting as minutes dragged by. I knew they were just outside the door, maybe hoping I would try to come out. After about 10 minutes, I finally thought, forget it. I'll take a quick look through the window. I crept over and gently lifted the edge of the blind just enough to peek through with one eye. The porch was empty. No one was there. The whole group had vanished without making any sound of leaving. I didn't bother grabbing anything except my car keys. I sprinted out of the cabin, got in my car, and sped away from those woods. I kept expecting to see them waiting along the dirt road. After all, it was narrow and ran through the dark forest. They easily could have blocked it somehow, but I made it out without seeing anyone else. I still don't really understand what happened at the cabin that night. That many people sneaking around the woods and stalking me at my off-grid cabin, probably draining my generator but then not doing anything. It just makes no sense. What were they trying to accomplish? Sadly, I have no answers. But if anyone thinks they might know who that group was or what they were planning, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I haven't been back to the cabin since. But since I own it, eventually I'll have to return. Honestly, I'm scared to find out what I might discover when I do. We moved into my grandparents' house in 2016 when they chose to downsize. I was 9 years old. They had built the house in the early 90s, and it sits on 5 acres just outside a small southern town. Woods and open fields spread out around it, and a slow, muddy river winds along our southern fence line. On 2 sides, our land touches the property of our only neighbors. An odd and crooked patch with a house that looked like it was sinking into the earth. That house was ancient. The original farmhouse had been built in the 1920s, and over the years it was expanded in the worst ways, as if someone stapled extra rooms together without a real plan. The siding was discolored and seemed soft. Every time you glanced at it, the wood looked wet, even when the weather was dry. The yard was a total disaster. Overgrown bushes choked with vines, broken fountains covered in weeds, headless gnomes, and old trash that seemed like it had been there forever. Grocery bags hung from the tree branches. A rusted lawnmower sat dead center in the grass, like it broke down during mowing and was just left there. It was the kind of place that made you want to hold your breath when you passed by. Back then, 2 elderly sisters named Violet and Agnes lived in the house with 3 kids. Violet was the quiet one, always sitting on the porch in a faded green rocking chair, just staring at the trees. Agnes was sharper and a little more active, but she still moved like her joints hurt. Both women had to be in their 70s at least. The children were their grandchildren. The boy, Liam, was my age and in my grade at school. The other 2 were girls named Allison and Kelsey, who were the same age as my younger sister. Liam was strange. I didn't like him and didn't want to hang out with him, but since we were in the same class, we ended up around each other a lot. He took that as a reason to just show up at my house anytime he wanted, without knocking or texting. I'd be playing a game in my room and suddenly turn around and he'd just be there. One time I looked outside and saw him doing cannonballs in our pool. Another time he came into our kitchen, opened the fridge, and started eating a slice of leftover pizza with his bare hands like it was normal. He wasn't fun to hang out with. He was obsessed with anime, really obsessed, but I didn't watch any, so I never knew what he was talking about. He'd say strange lines in Japanese and get mad when I didn't laugh. Sometimes he'd get this look in his eyes like he was imagining something violent. One time he chased me with a sharp pair of garden shears, swinging them and laughing like it was some kind of game. Another time we were on the old wooden bridge that crossed the creek near the back of our yards, and I swear he tried to push me in. He said it was a joke, but the smile on his face told me he meant it. The twins were different. They were quiet and almost invisible. Their clothes were always filthy, and they had speech problems that made them hard to understand. It was clear no one at home cared for them properly. Their voices were garbled, like they were still toddlers even though they were 7. They flinched easily and always seemed hungry. Their dad was in and out of jail, so he wasn't around. That brings us to their mom, Teresa. The first time I saw her, she was trying to hook up a hose to the spigot at the edge of their yard near ours. She was tall, much taller than anyone else in her family, and heavy-set, with long, thick, curly black hair and glasses that looked like they were from the 80s. She was different, put together in a way the others weren't. Her clothes were clean, her hair was always styled as well. She smiled at me like she'd been waiting for me to come over. She asked if I could help her with the faucet because it was stuck. I walked over and turned it easily. She gasped and clapped her hands, telling me I was so strong and how lucky she was that I showed up. I felt proud. She made me feel like I was important. Then she said, "Did you know you have a third eye?" I blinked. "What?" She grinned wider and said, "Everyone has one. Not a real eye, but a spiritual one." She said, "It lets you see the truth," whatever that meant. Before I could ask anything else, she started walking back to her house and told me to come along. So I did. The inside of their house hit me like a wall of rot. It smelled like spoiled food, mildew, and something worse I couldn't figure out. Trash was everywhere. Torn garbage bags, rotting food on plates, stained furniture, even dirty diapers were shoved behind the couch. I tried to leave, but Teresa grabbed my wrist and led me upstairs. Her room was nothing like the rest of the house. It was spotless, with pink wallpaper, clean carpet, shelves full of porcelain dolls, and fancy old furniture. The air smelled like rose water and old perfume. It felt like I stepped into a completely different building. She pointed to a cushioned stool in the corner for me to sit on, then went to her vanity and opened a drawer. She took out a silver tray with a black candle, a crystal, and a thick leather-bound book. The moment I saw the pentagram on the cover, my stomach twisted. My family is Catholic. I knew what that symbol meant, and suddenly I noticed it everywhere, in the jewelry box, on the mirror frame, even peeking out from under the rug corner, carved into the wood. I jumped up. "Sorry, my mom wants me home. Bye." I didn't wait for her to answer. I ran. In 2019, Agnes had a heart attack and died inside the house. I heard she collapsed in the living room right in front of the kids. I went to the funeral. It was held in this run-down Baptist church on the outskirts of town. The family sat stiff, like they didn't know how to react, except for one woman I had never seen before. She sat in the second pew crying so loud it echoed. Nobody said anything to her. That same year, Liam disappeared. They said he tried to kill one of the twins and was sent to a mental hospital. I never got the full story, but that night my parents sat my sister and me down and made it clear that we were never to go near that family again. I remember their serious, grim faces. That's when everything started to make sense, all the strange things I hadn't figured out before. The fear, the weirdness. Eventually, the rest of the family moved away. They left Violet behind, just a frail old woman living alone in that collapsing house. She died in 2020, alone in that house. A few months later, her estate went up for sale. One of my old elementary school teachers, Mrs. S., bought the place with her husband. They tore down most of the house but kept the original 1920 section, the same area where Teresa's room had been. Mrs. S. invited us to see the renovations. The house was beautiful, an open floor plan, brand new appliances, fresh paint. She took us upstairs and my skin started crawling. We stood in her room and I could feel it. Even with the new carpet, I knew the pentagram was still under there, like the floor remembered. I felt sick, like something was watching from the walls. I told Mrs. S. I had a headache and needed to go. She was disappointed. I was supposed to stay for dinner. After that, I avoided the house until last year. Mrs. S. asked me to dog sit while they were out of town for a week. I said yes, thinking it would be an easy job. Quick money. Each night I rang the doorbell and they unlocked it remotely. Their dogs, the Shih Tzu named Muffin and a snorting pug named Henry, greeted me, tails wagging. The first 4 nights were calm, peaceful even. I fed the dogs, played with them, turned on the porch light, and locked up when I left. But on the last night, I was about to leave when Henry began barking at the staircase. He planted his little feet and barked over and over. Muffin backed away, whining. There was nothing there. Then came a thump from upstairs. Another thump, even louder. I didn't stay to see what it was. I ran to the door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it. The entire walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Now it's 2025. We hadn't heard anything about that family for over 4 years. That is, until recently. A girl at school said she saw Teresa at a farmer's market in a nearby town. Supposedly, she started some sort of religious group. She calls herself a truth seer. They live in a mobile home park far out in the woods. Flyers have started appearing on bulletin boards and telephone poles. I don't trust any of it. I don't trust her. I believe Teresa is truly evil. I mean, she neglected her children. She left her mother in that house to rot. And I think she brought something dark into that house, something that stayed there. I still have nightmares about her and Liam. They stand at the foot of my bed, staring without speaking. And every time I pass that house, even now, I get chills. The new paint, the furniture, it's all just surface. That house remembers, and I don't think it ever let go of what happened. This happened in late 2022 when I went on what I assumed would be a fun and easy first date with someone I matched with on a dating app. Her name was Emily, and we had been messaging for about 2 weeks before agreeing to meet. We both loved horror films, and when Smile was released, we thought it would make an ideal first date. We chose a weekday evening, Thursday. The showing was late, 10:15 p.m. at a small older cinema just outside the city. I offered to drive and picked her up around 9:30. She came across as normal and friendly, maybe a bit quiet. She stayed mostly silent during the drive, but started opening up when we discussed the scary movies we grew up watching. When we arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. I joked about how the theater itself looked like it belonged in a horror film. Dim lights, flickering neon signs, and not a single person in sight. When we stepped inside, only one guy was working the concession stand. I asked if the theater was going to be full, and he chuckled, saying we were the only ones who bought tickets for that screening. At first, I thought that was awesome. No crowds, just me, her, and the film. We entered Theater 6 and chose seats near the center, about 4 rows from the back. It was freezing inside, something Emily noticed right away. I offered her my hoodie, and we laughed at how creepy it was to be alone in the entire auditorium. We leaned back and chatted while waiting for the trailers to finish. I started sensing some chemistry and figured this might actually be one of those dates that turns into something more. Just before the movie began, right after the last trailer and as the lights dimmed lower, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone had walked into the theater. They didn't say a word, didn't pause to scan the seats or check their phone like most people do. They slowly climbed the stairs and sat right behind us. I mean, literally right behind me. Out of maybe 100 empty seats, he chose the one directly behind mine. Emily looked back too, then shot me a strange glance like, "Seriously?" I chuckled and muttered, "Figures." But something instantly felt wrong. You know that feeling when you're sure someone is staring at the back of your head? That's exactly how it felt. I glanced back a minute later. He wasn't watching the screen. He was fixated on us. I only caught a glimpse, but he didn't blink or turn away. He didn't even try to act like he was watching the film. He was leaning forward slightly like someone would during a tense moment, but his face wasn't turned to the screen. It was angled at us, at me. I leaned toward Emily and whispered, "He's just staring." She nodded slowly and whispered back, "I know." We tried to ignore it. The movie had started, and I made an effort to focus on it. But every few minutes I'd feel it again, that presence behind us. It wasn't just annoying. This was something different. There was a strange intensity to it, like he was waiting for something. After about 20 minutes, I leaned forward in my seat and turned slightly to glance behind more casually. Same thing. He was still watching us. He looked to be in his late 40s, clean-shaven, pale, dressed in a dark gray hoodie. Something about him just seemed vacant, like he wasn't fully there. His eyes didn't appear glazed like someone zoning out. From what I could tell, he never even blinked. I turned back around and quietly told Emily, "This guy is seriously creeping me out." She looked honestly scared now. "Should we move?" she asked. We thought about it, but where would we go? We'd still be in the same theater, and we already had the best seats. Moving could make it worse or trigger him somehow. A few minutes after that, I felt it. He breathed on me. Not loudly or dramatically, just a soft, deliberate exhale behind my head. I spun around. He was leaning over the back of my seat, face far too close. I stared at him and said, "Dude, can you not?" He didn't reply. He just slowly leaned back into his seat. That was it. I turned to Emily and said, "Let's move." We stood up and walked down to the front corner of the room. The angle was terrible, but we needed to put distance between us and him. I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. I kept checking behind us every couple of minutes, and every single time he was still there, locked in on us. He never moved. About halfway through the film, we heard footsteps. He was walking down the steps. Emily grabbed my arm, and we both froze. The footsteps stopped a few rows behind us. We didn't turn around. I had no idea how long he stood there, and I wasn't about to look. Eventually, he climbed back up to the top row. I whispered, "We have to leave." She nodded. We grabbed our stuff and quietly slipped out. As we walked down the hallway toward the lobby, I looked back through the glass in the theater door. He was standing in the aisle. He still wasn't watching the movie. He was standing completely still, staring at us. We went straight to the front and told the concession worker that someone in Theater 6 was acting really strange. His smile disappeared, and he said, "Again? What do you mean again?" I asked, and he paused before saying, "He's been coming in for like a month now, always during late shows and never buys anything. You're not the first people to complain." I asked, "Why hasn't anyone kicked him out?" He looked uneasy and replied, "He hasn't technically done anything illegal. Management says unless he touches someone or breaks a rule, we can't really do much." Emily looked like she was about to cry. She asked if someone could walk us to the car. He said yes, and a janitor offered to escort us outside. That night, the guy didn't follow us, or at least, not that we noticed. But on the way home, I couldn't shake this fear that he may have memorized my license plate, that he might have followed from a distance, watched where we went, or figured out where Emily lived after I dropped her off. I was paranoid for weeks. A friend of mine who's a cop told me it was complete crap that they couldn't do anything. The theater, as a business, had every right to remove someone from the premises. I stayed away from that part of town for a while. Emily and I messaged a few times after that, but we never met up again. I think we were both too shaken by the experience. I haven't stepped foot in that theater since. And even though there are no reviews online about that man, I can't help but wonder how many others have experienced the same thing. There was a pretty strong thunderstorm happening that night. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make everyone stay indoors for the rest of the day. I'm one of those people who actually enjoy rainy nights or even storms. Something about it just feels cozy and calming to me. Whenever nights like this happened, I would always spend them on the couch watching TV and listening to the rain. Fortunately, I didn't have work the next day, and since it was already 8 p.m., I made myself a hot cup of coffee and decided to stay up as late as I wanted to enjoy the cozy atmosphere. I sat down and turned on a movie. It was only about 20 minutes into the movie when my phone began ringing. I picked it up and checked the number, but I didn't recognize it. The area code, however, was from my city. I answered just in case, always thinking it could be something important or maybe someone I knew but hadn't saved their number. Hello? No one said anything. Can I help you? Hello? Still, there was no response. Oddly enough, I could tell the line wasn't dead. I could hear some background noise. It was faint and messy, and after a few seconds of thinking, it sounded like the storm or the rain outside. So I knew someone was definitely there, just not speaking. Feeling a bit uneasy, I hung up. I couldn't really think of any reason someone would call and say nothing. I figured it must have been a mistake or some kind of scam, though it wasn't like the usual robot calls. I tossed my phone back on the end table and went back to watching TV. I was well into the movie, probably an hour in, when all of a sudden the storm outside became way louder, like it seriously picked up, thunder, lightning, and heavy rain all at once. Then the TV and lights flickered. They quickly turned off and came right back on in less than a second. I paused the movie and glanced around, not sure what was going on. Then not even 30 seconds later, the power went out completely. Suddenly, the whole house was silent, and the storm outside sounded twice as loud. Rain was pounding on the roof and against the windows, and the thunder kept rolling non-stop for what felt like 5 minutes straight. The only light I had was a small candle I rarely used. Of course, I had my phone, but I didn't want to use up its battery since I wasn't sure how long this would last. I lit the candle, then decided to check the breaker box downstairs. I went down and saw the switch was loose. I flipped it back and forth a few times, but it was totally dead. I headed back upstairs and realized there was really nothing to do except watch the storm through the window. I noticed all the other houses on the street were dark as well, so it seemed like the outage was affecting the whole area. My phone was running on 5G data, so I checked for any updates on the situation, but there was nothing posted. I was probably standing at the window for around 15 minutes just watching and listening to the storm when all of a sudden I heard something outside the house. I knew the sound instantly. It was the gate to my backyard swinging open. That gate didn't have any kind of lock, but it never just swings open by itself. Not sure what to think, I walked to the back of the house and looked out the back door. Even through the dark and the storm, I could see the shadow of a man. He had clearly come from the side where the gate was, but now he was just standing out in the rain, right in the middle of the backyard. Since I could only make out his outline, he just looked like a dark shape. I couldn't tell where he was facing. Was he looking towards the house at me or away from it? I had no idea what he was doing out there, but it made me feel uneasy. I knew I could open the door and yell at him to get off my property, but I felt too nervous. I mean, if he was wandering around in a massive storm like this, who's to say he didn't have a gun or something worse? I decided not to confront him and just stayed by the door to keep an eye on him. He didn't move at all for an entire minute until his arm slowly lifted out from his pocket and he brought his hand up to his head. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I noticed a small glowing light in his hand. Just as I realized what it was, my phone started ringing in the other room. It only took me a couple of seconds to understand what was happening. This guy outside my house was calling me. That explained why I heard rain on the call earlier when no one spoke. But that had been an hour ago. Had he been standing out there in the storm this entire time? Feeling panicked, I ran to the living room and grabbed my phone, confirming it was the same number. Without answering it, I hurried back to the door. But the man was gone. That freaked me out even more. Why hadn't I just stayed by the door and watched him? I felt so stupid. I didn't want to stay by the door anymore, knowing he could be watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. I went back to the living room. I thought about calling the police, but what could I even tell them? Someone had called me twice and was standing in my backyard, but I had no proof it was the same person or that they were doing anything illegal. Not long after that, my phone rang again. I jumped, even though I half expected it. That's how shaken I was. I declined the call, and only seconds later there was a loud knock at the front door. They kept calling while knocking on the door. These were heavy, forceful knocks that made the walls shake. I turned my phone on silent, and embarrassingly, I froze up and didn't move. I know how bad that sounds, but I've never been in a situation like this before, and the storm and power outage just made it worse. I think it took about 30 seconds, and them hitting the door even harder before I snapped out of it and finally called the police. My hands were trembling as I held the phone. They told me an officer was on the way and was only about 4 minutes from my house. I kept them updated on what was happening while the man outside kept pounding on the door. This went on the whole time while I waited for the police to arrive. At last, the operator told me they were on my street. Moments later, I heard someone shouting. I ran to the window and saw the officer chasing the man. They ran off into the storm, and I couldn't see anything after that. I think I waited about 2 minutes before the officer returned empty-handed. The guy had gotten away. I was actually surprised by how seriously the police took the situation. They did a pretty solid investigation and seemed to really care. Probably because they had actually seen the guy and tried to catch him. But the only lead they had was the phone number, and that turned out to be useless. I tried thinking of anyone who might hold a grudge against me or want to scare me like this, but I couldn't come up with anyone. The case eventually faded away, and since then I haven't gotten any more calls from that number or seen anything strange again. You can support me by subscribing to my channel. It helps a lot and inspires me to keep creating more scary horror videos like this. Thank you, and see you on the next one. Stay spooky.